Deputy Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Deputy Speaker.
Honorable members, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, SC, MP, Member for Siparia, Mr. Rushton Parry, MP, Member for Mayaro, Mr. Prakash Ramada, MP, Member for St. Augustine, and Mr. Ganga Singh, MP, Member for Chaguanas West, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
The Minister of Finance.
That's not right. I have the honor to lay the following papers, Mr. Deputy Speaker. 1 to 3, the audited financial statements of the Cocoa Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial years ending September 30th, 2014, 2015, and 2016. The annual report of Taurus Services Limited for the financial year ending September 30th, 2017. I beg to move that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Urupuch West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister for Works and Transport, in light of reports that the Galleon's Passage will once again remain in Cuba for upgrades, could the Minister indicate the new estimated time of arrival of the vessel?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regards to the time of the arrival of the MV Galleon Passage, it is estimated that the vessel will depart on July 10, 2018 from Cuba. The vessel's sailing time is approximately 4 to 6 days, fair weather permitting and good sea conditions. The Galleon Passage should arrive by July 16, 2018. Thank you.
Member for Urupuch West.
Honourable Minister, what were the upgrades, if any, that were carried out on the particular vessel? What were the upgrades done?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when the vessel was purchased, there was some retrofitting to be done by the seller, and some of the retrofitting, the cost of which would have been bought by the buyer. The retrofitting in Cuba is the retrofitting with the cost to be bought by the seller, which includes a front canopy and some other retrofittings to the vessel. Thank you.
Point to pay, you had your hand up first? I know you had it up earlier. So you'll give way to your colleague, or you'll proceed? All right, member for Caroni East.
Honourable Minister, would you be in a position to give the total approximate cost for this vessel to be in Trinidad and functional?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I don't have that figure with me, but that figure will be made available to the Parliament at the end of once the vessel has arrived in Trinidad.
Next question. Only two supplementers, member for Windsor. Shogunas East. Question number 2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, could the Minister confirm whether a Caribbean Airlines aircraft to be used in the upcoming busy travel period was sabotaged?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as far as I'm aware, all Caribbean Airlines aircraft that are in service are in full compliance with all civil aviation requirements. Therefore, I cannot confirm this question.
Supplemental, member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Honourable Minister indicate the status of the Boeing 737-800 9Y Alpha November United, ANU?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I do know is that one of Caribbean Airlines aircraft is currently in the process of undergoing a C-check, which is a full overhaul of the aircraft, and usually takes about 1 month, and the C-check is still in progress.
Supplemental, Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Honourable Minister indicate the reason why the C-check, which was started on the 5th of June and supposed to be completed on the 12th of June, why was there a delay in 9Y and ANU?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I just said, my understanding of a C-check is it takes a month.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Works and Transport, in light of a recent warning to motorists from licensing officers regarding a $5,000 fine for not having inspection stickers, could the Minister confirm if these inspection stickers are available at all inspection centers across the country?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the licensing division, there are adequate stickers, books, and complete packages for purchase by the owners of the private vehicular testing station. All outstanding backlog has been cleared, and stickers are available for both private and commercial vehicles at all inspection centers and 4 licensing offices, Port of Spain, Caroni, San Fernando, and Tobago. In that regard, any private vehicle owner going to any inspection center must insist that they receive a sticker. Failure to do so, the vehicle owner has a duty to report the inspection center to the licensing division immediately. I thank you.
Supplemental, member for Tabakit.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the Honourable Minister aware that people who went to have their vehicles examined, T-vehicles for inspection last year, have not yet received their stickers? And up to last week, people were going to the licensing office and there were no stickers?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am aware that last year there was an issue with the availability of the license stickers. However, my information is that all licensing offices have adequate stickers. And as I said, if any citizen goes to these centers, they should report them to the licensing authority. Thank you.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Minister, as a follow-up, I would have had personal experience, and some of my constituents would have had their vehicles inspected when there was a shortage of stickers, and they would have been given a certificate from the inspection center. Are these valid in terms of presentation to the police at this point in time, or would they have to seek a new sticker?
Minister of Works and Transport.
My advice on that is that they should present it back to the inspection garages, centers, and they will give them the relevant stickers. The thing about what you have is a certificate to say that a vehicle was inspected, and the license office and the police officers would have accepted that. There was a shortage last year, and that has been rectified. Thank you.
Questions on notice. Questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are 6 questions for oral answer. We will be answering 5. There are no questions for written answer. The question that we are asking for a deferral of 2 weeks is question number 273. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I will now recognize the member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 272 to the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government. Question number 272.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for Faizabad for the question. The Siparia Regional Corporation, which has the responsibility for this cremation site, has advised the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government that it has introduced new security measures, which include the use of municipal police to conduct regular patrols and visits to the Mosquito Creek cremation site. The corporation has advised that there are also plans to acquire and install a surveillance security system, closed-circuit cameras with a monitoring room at the Siparia Regional Municipal Police Station. Further, the corporation has advised that with immediate effect, a program to sensitize the public on the safe use of the cremation site will be introduced with the necessary warning signs placed at strategic locations on the site.
Supplemental, Faizabad.
Yeah, Minister, could you indicate whether any consideration is being given to the installation of surveillance cameras at the site? Sorry, can you indicate when those will be installed?
Minister of Rural Development.
Thank you
Local Government and Rural Development, sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. As I said, the corporation has advised, and there are plans to acquire and install a surveillance security system, closed-circuit cameras with a monitoring room at the Siparia Regional Corporation.
Supplemental for Princess Town.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable Minister, one of the mechanisms you indicated that will be utilized is the presence of the municipal police officers. Could you tell us how many officers are currently at the Siparia Regional Corporation, whether you believe these are sufficient numbers that will be able to do the job in terms of providing additional surveillance of the area?
Minister of Local Government and Rural Development.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The member for Princess Town, I'll have to give you the exact amount of police officers there, but there are limited police officers there. But the plan, I spoke to the chairman of just before I came here, and they plan to utilize whatever resources they have at the Siparia Municipal Police Station.
Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable Minister, are you giving an assurance to this House, and through this House to the public, that the cameras will be set up, you being in charge also of the Siparia Regional Corporation as the Minister?
Minister of Local Government and Rural Development.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank the member for Tabaki. As I have said, Honourable Member, the corporation has given me the assurance that they will do this. I have to depend on the corporation.
A follow-up, because...
Yeah.
All right. Member for Tabakit.
Is the Minister therefore prepared to give an assurance that he'll provide the necessary financing to the corporation in order to have it done?
Minister of Local Government and Rural Development. Members, I'm recognizing the Minister for Local Government and Rural Development in terms of the question posed. Chief Whip, please, Leader of the House.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As far as I am aware, if the corporation has advised the Ministry of Local Government that they are going to do it, I suppose that they have the money. Because they didn't tell me if they didn't have the funding or not. Because I spoke to the chairman, I said, just before I came here. And he gave me the assurance he was going to install the cameras.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 274 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The reasons for the lower number of cataract surgeries performed under the previous UNC government at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex in comparison to the Port of Spain General and San Fernando General Hospitals are as follows. Previous UNC government. Prior to 2014, there were only 2 surgeons performing these surgeries with malfunctioning surgical sets and limited trained nurses. This is your time. During the year 2015, your time again, there were no surgical packs for 9 months. And in comparison to other hospitals, the Eric Williams Medical Science Complex has 1 operating theater, 1 phaco machine, and 1 surgical microscope, as opposed to 2 in other hospitals. Your time. Since September 2015, under this new caring PNM government, the following development initiatives were undertaken. 1, an increase in the number of surgeons performing cataract surgery at Eric Williams from 2 to 4, 100% increase in surgeons. 2, provision of a reliable supply of surgical packs and sets at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. 3, review and upgrade of the workflow processes and training of staff and the conduct of cataract surgeries at Eric Williams on Sundays. Based on the above initiatives taken by this present caring PNM government, there is an increased improvement in the number of cataract surgeries performed at the complex. For the period January to May 2018, over 452 cataract procedures have already been performed, and this is 216 more than the average number of procedures performed previously for the corresponding period of the year. This is equivalent to a 90% increase in number of cataract surgeries performed by Eric Williams under this new caring PNM government. When compared to what prevailed under the previous UNC government. I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental, Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure the population will be happy to hear of those improvements. But the question remains that even in 2016 and 2017, which is the statistics I referred to, that there's still a discrepancy between what happens at that region and the other regions. Can you explain?
As everyone knows, procurement takes a while. You don't procure today for today. So we had to procure the phaco machines even when oil was $26 a barrel. We had to procure the surgeons even when oil was $26 a barrel. We had to do all of those things because under your tenure, your solution to everything in health was to build a hospital in Couva. That was your solution to cataract surgeries. Our solution, when oil went to $27 a barrel, this Minister of Finance made the resources necessary so we could purchase more phaco machines. It takes time. There's a lead time for phaco machines. We had to get more surgeons, and it will have a lag time. But 90% more now than before. I hope that answers your question.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, the Deputy Speaker. Could the Minister then tell us when, given all these initiatives by this so-called caring PNM government, that when will the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex be able to have comparative figures with the Port of Spain General and San Fernando General Hospital? A specific answer.
Minister of Health.
That process has already begun.
Will it start, finish?
It has already begun because previously you all never used the operating theaters on a weekend. We now have something called surgical Sundays. And my answer said specifically, due to improved work processes and using downtime on a Sunday for non-emergency surgeries, we are now performing surgical Sundays, hernia operations, cataract surgeries, and so on. So that is why you denuded Eric Williams, you did not hire the doctors, you did not have the packs in 2015. We had to come in when oil was $27 a barrel and fix everything because you all didn't do it when oil was $100 a barrel. Right? And people ran away to Panama with the money. So that is what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Remember, the last part, let's retract the last
statement,
I retract.
Please. I retract.
Thank you. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, would you be prepared to give in writing a comparative figure for surgical team at each of these institutions?
Minister of Health.
Once the question is appropriately posed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it will be answered, as all questions are. But to continue in the vein of what we are doing with Eric Williams, 2 Saturdays ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the first time in the history of this country, we had 500 women coming for pap smears. 500. First time in the history of this country, the public health system took 500 women for pap smears. Some who never had a pap smear done in their life. That is what we are doing at Eric Williams. Thank you again, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Last supplemental, and I recognize Naparima.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Like the Galleon passage, it's coming. Like everything, it is coming. When will we get the properly functioning cataract services at the Eric Williams Medical Center? Not it starting. When will we get it?
Minister of Health. Minister of Health.
Thank you. So, since September 2015, in case you missed it the first time because you were busy spinning the wheel, since September 2015, we increased, no, it didn't come in, it came. It came, it done. We increased the surgeons from 2 to 4, done, dusted. Since 2015, provision of a reliable supply of surgical plaques, done, dusted. Since 2015, review the work processes, train staff, done, dusted. Since September 2015, conduct of cataract surgeries on a Sunday. All these things which you could not do have been done. Not coming, not coulda, shoulda, woulda, have been done. Have been done. Mr. Deputy Speaker, apparently they don't understand language. It has been done since September 2015. 100% more doctors since 2015. A reliable supply of packs since 2015. Change the work processes and use of the theaters on a Sunday since September 2015. That is why we were able to do 90% more surgeries. Because they probably have less people waiting for surgeries, my friend.
Please.
Simple.
Please. Supplementers on that question has expired. Urupuch West.
Question number 277 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. With respect to information received from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security concerning allegations of a prostitution ring involving women from South America and local law enforcement officials, no official report has been made to date. However, the Professional Standard Bureau of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service monitors such reports and initiates all necessary actions, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Urupuch West, next question.
Question number 278 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you again very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On May the 2nd, 2018, both the sterilizer units were non-operational due to a steam supply issue of one and the malfunction of doors on the other. All the repairs have since been made to both units, and the 5 patients affected were all rescheduled for surgery. Thank you very much.
Oakridge West.
Thank you. Question number 279 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This question has a three-part answer. A, the Commissioner of Police has indicated that the Complaints Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Police has on record a total of 450 officers under investigation for disciplinary misconduct. However, the name of police officers are not always included in the initial complaints, and therefore the figure can vary once an investigation has commenced and the officer or officers are identified in relation to the allegation. B, with respect to the issue of curtailing disciplinary misconduct, Section 151 and 152 of the Police Service Regulations, 2007, Section 151 of the Police Service Regulations is extracted and read as follows. An officer who fails to comply with these regulations or any order or directive for the time being enforced in the service commits a disciplinary offense and is liable to disciplinary proceedings in accordance with the procedures prescribed in this part. In an effort to address the issue of disciplinary misconduct, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has implemented inter alia the following measures. 1. Training and procedural sensitization. This follows the training content and delivery focuses on giving officers practical tools to strengthen their capacity to respond to situations in an appropriate manner. Secondly, internal conferences are held, which is a meeting referred to as a formal internal conference held between the complainant, officers against whom the complaint has been made, and representatives from the complaints divisions, with the aim of arriving at a mutually agreed speedy resolution to the complaint. Thirdly, targeting problem solving via management support. In this engagement, factors included but not limited to are considered. 1, the public environment and the nature of duties engaged in, the officer's performance and attendance, any misconduct sanctions, welfare issues of the officer, and views of line management. Recommendations that may include ongoing monitoring, welfare referral, training or counseling interventions which also be made. This direct approach is intended to result in a reduction in the number of complaints that an officer attracts in the future. The last part of your question, with respect to the issue of changing the screening process for Trinidad and Tobago police recruits, the Police Academy recruitment process is guided by the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, Regulations 2017, Part 1, Recruitment and Appointments, Regulations 3 to 8. The recruitment and selection process involves the following: advertisement in the media, pre-screening of applicants, written examinations, completion of prescribed application forms, physiological screening, medical examination, agility tests, polygraph tests, background investigation, dangerous drug tests, pregnancy tests for females, panel interview. The screening process continues to be guided by this authority, and as such, there has been no changes. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House unmoved by a minister, public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that a bill entitled an Act to amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be now read a second time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill before the House essentially has one clause, because the first clause is simply the short title. The second clause, clause 2, amends section 6(1) of the Corporation Tax Act. The purpose of the amendment is to exempt the payment of corporation tax on the profits of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited and on interest payable on bonds issued by that company. To give you some background, as we will all be aware, CL Financial and its major subsidiaries, including Colonial Life, collapsed in 2009. And the government had, at the time, put in place an arrangement with the shareholders of CLF to bail out the conglomerate using taxpayers' money. The position of the government was always to, among other things, protect policyholders, including traditional and short-term investment product holders, and safeguard depositors. As I've indicated in other places and on other occasions, the government injected a sum in the order of 23+ billion in respect of the bailout. As of late last year, the government had only recovered approximately 7 billion out of that 23+ billion. And as has been widely publicized, the government had no choice but to take the matter to court to recover the balance, which at that time was in excess of $15 billion. After quite a lengthy process in the court put the CLF operations fully into the hands of liquidators. Further, as we should all know, Colonial Life has been under the control of the Colonial Life Insurance Company, has been under the control of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for many years, and Clico Investment Bank was put into compulsory liquidation on or around 2011. The liquidator in the case of Clico Investment Bank was and is the Deposit Insurance Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago. Arising out of this liquidation exercise, and more specifically arising out of the recovery in particular of assets held by the Colonial Life Insurance Company and Clico Investment Bank, the government has been able to recover assets as part payment of the debt still owed to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't think I need to emphasize that the repayment of this debt is critically important to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is also a policy position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, this government, that any assets recovered on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago should, as far as is practicable, be monetized for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is with this strategic consideration and this policy position, the government chose to create the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. The company is intended to represent a vehicle for monetizing the assets transferred to the government from Colonial Life in particular. It was decided that the shares obtained by the government as a result of the recovery of debt would form, in the main, the portfolio of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. These shares include Republic Finance Holdings Limited, also known as Republic Bank, One Caribbean Media, which is the parent company of TV6 and the Express newspaper, Angostura Holdings Limited, and the West Indian Tobacco Company Limited. It was also decided that in order to further diversify the portfolio of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited, certain shares held by the government in a wholly owned state enterprise, Trinidad Generation Limited, TGU, would also be included in the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited portfolio. It is estimated that through this process of placing assets into the newly created National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited, that an amount of approximately 4 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars could be generated in this year, this fiscal year, through the monetization of the assets from the portfolio of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. The primary objective is to facilitate the widest possible participation of a wide cross-section of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and to involve citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in the benefits of the stream of income from the companies, and at the same time deepen and widen our local capital market. Further, given that public resources were utilized for restructuring CLICO and CIB, it was advisable that citizens of Trinidad and Tobago benefit from the monetization. Let me give some details now of the portfolio. The portfolio of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited is proposed to comprise the following. Republic Finance Holdings Limited, shares in the value of $4.3 billion, would comprise 55% of the shares in the company, vested in the company. West Indian Tobacco Limited, $405 million, would represent 5% of the shares vested in the company. One Caribbean Media, share value $200 million, represent 2% of the share assets to be vested in the company. Angostura Holdings Limited, share value to be vested in the company, $970 million, representing 12% of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited portfolio. And Trinidad Generation Unlimited, value $2.025 billion, representing 26% of the assets to be vested in the National Investment Fund Company Limited. And I may say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as time goes by and as other assets become available, we may give consideration to, if these are high value, high income yielding assets from stable companies, we may give some consideration in the future to a swap of some of the shares. For example, there is a company called Methanol Holdings International, which is still owned by, the shares in that company are owned by Colonial Life, and the process of acquiring those shares is rather convoluted. But if at some point in time in the future those shareholdings are transferred to the state, we may give consideration to swapping that asset with some of these assets. But this is the NIF at this point in time. So let me just repeat. Republic Finance Holdings will make up 55% of the assets. Whitco will make up 5%, One Caribbean Media 2%, Angostura 12%, TGU 26%, for a total of 100. You may have heard, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that just over 42 million shares of Republic Holdings and 1,305,000 shares of One Caribbean were transferred from CLICO Investment Bank, who had them, to government or government-owned or controlled entities. This happened recently. In addition, 61,677,000 shares of Angostura Limited, 13,980,000 shares of One Caribbean Media, and 4,548,000 shares of Whitco were transferred from CLICO to the government. So the government has received shares in two ways: directly from Colonial Life and also from CLICO Investment Bank, either directly or indirectly through state enterprises which were creditors of CLICO Investment Bank. The values of the shares were determined through stock market valuations. So we were quite careful to ensure that everything was transparent and above board. It is the intention that all of the shares forming part of the portfolio, as they make their way to their final destination into the National Investment Fund Holding Company will be transferred at market value. So market valuation, with the sole exception, because these are listed companies, Republic Finance is listed, West Indian Tobacco is listed, One Caribbean Media is listed, Angostura is listed, Trinidad Generation is not listed, but a very comprehensive valuation was done by an international firm in order to get the value of TGU. But it is intended that as the shares make their way to their final destination to become the assets of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited, that the shares will be transferred at market value. Now let's look at how we're monetizing these assets and why we're here today debating this bill, and how we propose to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago benefit in the best possible way. The Ministry of Finance considered several options. We engaged expert consultants and looked at the technical feasibility of either the issuance of units or of shares, and the capacity of the market to participate in an offering of this magnitude. I wish to point out we are talking about raising $4 billion here. This would be the first time, as far as I know, that the public will be approached to participate in an offering of $4 billion. In the past, public participation that I am aware of has been of the order of $1.5 billion. TTNGL, FCB, etc. So the three options were looked at. Firstly, the setting up of a fund similar to the CLICO Investment Fund, which is a closed-end fund listed on the stock exchange, backed by Republic Bank shares and other assets for which units were issued. So that's one option, to use the CLICO Investment Fund or CIF model, where you back units by assets and you issue units at a price equal to the value of the assets. Option two, forming of a new company listed on the stock exchange, holding the assets in which the public could purchase shares. So it wouldn't be units in a fund. It would be a company that would have assets that would then make a share offering on the market. So that was option two. The third option, which is the option we have finally decided upon because we think it gives the best result for all concerned, the establishment of a state-owned company holding the assets, which would issue corporate bonds backed by the assets and dividends from the company. The company would sell the bonds to individuals, banks, or insurance companies, and redeem, and other entities, and redeem the bonds from a reserve fund established for that purpose. Just let me stick a pin here. You will have observed that we are seeking to raise $4 billion, but the assets will be closer to $8 billion. So we think we have sufficient buffer or safety net there in terms of redeeming the bonds when they become due, because the assets are worth $8 billion, but we're only issuing bonds to the tune of $4 billion. We did market research. We did not operate by BAPs. And it was determined from the market that neither a fund, a mutual fund or other type of fund, issuing units, or a company issuing shares could in all likelihood generate $4 billion through a public offering. When one looks at the current experience, the past history, with respect to the CLICO Investment Fund and with respect to other public offerings, it was felt it would be difficult to generate $4 billion through a public offering for several reasons. There are restrictions that govern the structuring of portfolios within the institutional sector, including pension funds and life insurance companies. And there are other reasons: the appetite of the market's appetite for risk, the view of the public in terms of public offerings, and so on. Because we don't have a fully developed local capital market at this time. After careful consideration, it was decided that an asset-backed corporate bond with appropriate tenors and coupons would be adequate to meet all of the varying investor requirements of individuals, companies, corporations, institutions, etc. To effect the issue of publicly listed fixed income asset-backed corporate bonds, the following comprise the elements of the transaction. The National Investment Fund Holding Company has been established as a limited liability company under the Companies Act. The government is in the process of transferring shares in Republic Bank, Angostura, One Caribbean, Whitco, and TGU to the National Investment Fund Holding Company. And in return, will receive a note amounting to the value of $7.92 billion, of which $3.92 billion would be converted to ordinary shares and held by government as sole shareholder of the company. The residual $4 billion would be repaid to government upon the receipt of the proceeds from asset-backed corporate bonds issued to the public in order to repay the $4 billion promissory note owed to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So the government, excuse me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government has put in approximately $8 billion in assets into this company and is receiving a promissory note from the company to repay the value of these assets over time. Submissions have been made or in progress to the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission to register the National Investment Holding Company as a reporting issuer under the Securities Act and to have its bonds similarly registered. The bonds would be listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. Drafts of submissions of a prospectus offering fixed income asset-backed bonds have been made to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Pursuant to Section 68(2) of the Stamp Duty Act, it is proposed that stamp duty will be waived to facilitate the share transfers in respect of the assets and the securitizing of the bond. The Caribbean Information and Credit Rating Services Limited, CARICRIS, we thought this was important, has been engaged to assign a credit rating to the corporate bond. We thought this would be useful for corporate investors. The fixed income asset-backed bonds would be a unique instrument being marketed on the capital market in Trinidad and Tobago. To that end, Ernst & Young and First Citizens Brokerage Advisory Services have been engaged, and in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, would undertake a comprehensive marketing effort to ensure that the national community understands the attribute of the instrument, which we believe would most certainly redound to the improvement of the investment portfolios of individuals, corporations, and institutions. We believe the national community will now benefit from an instrument which will provide access to quality assets, which the government has acquired through the repayment of the CLICO debt. Meet the objectives of the national community, their investment objectives in utilizing face value bonds in multiples of $1,000. The bonds, we have placed them at $1,000 to attract the widest possible participation in public offering. So persons and individuals and corporations can purchase bonds of $1,000 or multiples of $1,000. The bonds will provide regular interest through tax benefits to all bond holders and provide immediate liquidity, if required, through access to the stock exchange on which the bonds will be quoted. So if you buy a bond and you have an emergency or you want to make another investment, you can sell the bond. The bonds will be tradable on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. We now envisage that the bonds will be offered to the national community over the period July 11th to the 8th of August 2018 at rates broadly consistent with the government yield curve as follows. For tranche 1, the tenor or period would be 5 years and the interest rate will be 4.5%. For tranche 2, the tenor or period would be 12 years, the interest rate would be 5.7%. For tranche 3, the tenor or period would be 20 years, and the interest rate would be 6.6%. And our distribution of these bonds is as follows. We expect $1.2 billion to be yielded from the 5-year 4.5% bonds, $1.6 billion to yield, to be recovered or
members,
earned.
there's an electronic device that's vibrating, please.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I think it was mine. We expect $1.6 billion to be earned from the second tranche, the 12-year 5.7% bonds, and we expect $1.2 billion to be earned from the 20-year $6.6 billion bond. In each year, during the tenor of the fixed income asset-backed bonds, investors will be paid the fixed interest rate. After that payment, a minimum of the excess cash earned from the assets, because the Republic Bank shares, the Angostura shares, etc., will be providing dividends. And you have $8 billion in assets providing dividends. We anticipate the net yield from those dividends will be somewhere in the vicinity of 4.7 to 5%. We expect the annual yield from the assets to be somewhere, excuse me, in the vicinity of $400 million a year. In each year, part of that will be used to pay the interest on the bonds, and the balance will be transferred to a reserve fund for the purpose of repaying the bonds at the end of their tenor. At the end of the tenor of all bonds, in 20 years, the portfolio of assets would remain in the National Investment Fund Company, of which government would be the 100% shareholder. What this means, if I can summarize this, is that these valuable assets will always remain the property of the state. They will not be sold, given away, or otherwise auctioned off to wealthy individuals. They will remain the assets of the National Investment Fund Holding Company and be used to generate the necessary income to pay the interest due annually on the bonds and to redeem the bonds when they become due in the 5-year, 12-year, and 20-year periods. I hope this puts an end to any speculation that anybody may have had that is the government's intention to dissipate these assets and give them away to friends and investors. I want to repeat, or to the privileged few, or those with an inside track, I want to repeat that this government is vesting the assets, Republic Bank shares, etc., in the National Investment Holding Company and using the income from these assets to repay these bonds, so that these companies will always be the property of the state enterprise and will always be used to and for the benefit of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. The reason why we're here today is as an added feature, a lanyard, if you want to call it. Not only are we offering a very high interest rate, because those of you on the other side who have money, I understand there are few, will know that your deposits in the bank are currently earning of the order of 1% or less. I think if you look at the Abercrombie Fund in First Citizens, which is one of the better paying funds, you get about 0.9% or 0.8% or something like that, less than 1%. And that goes for your ordinary citizen, your ordinary retiree, persons who are living on fixed income, people who are living off their savings. What options are there for them in Trinidad and Tobago? You put your money in any financial institution where you will be guaranteed, the capital will be guaranteed, and it will be safe, you're looking at 1%. Look at what we are offering now. We are offering citizens 4.5%. 4.5%. And that is on the 5-year bond. The 12-year bond, as I indicated, is 5.7. The 20 years has been put in to cater for requests coming from institutional investors, because insurance companies have made the point to us that their investment horizon is very long. So they would take in premiums on policies, and they may keep it for 20 years. So you have a very long investment horizon. And they're always looking around for opportunities to grow their portfolio and to grow the income of their portfolio. So that's why we have a 20-year 6.6 bond. That's catered for those categories of investors and institutional investors like the unit trust, National Insurance Board, and so on, who will want to invest for the long term. And I can assure you that a yield of 6.6% is considerably more than these insurance companies and pension funds are getting at this point in time. Let me now go to the bill. As I said, it's very short. Clause 1 is the title. Clause 2 allows for the amendment of Section 6.1 of the Corporation Tax Act. They're just cleaning up measures to allow for the proposal, which is to allow, as I said, as a lanyard, tax-free income on these bonds. We had promised tax-free bonds. This is a way of killing two birds with one stone. This allows for a very good yield on a very solid product and also provides for tax exemptions. Now, we believe that the intrinsic value of the bonds is quite adequate for the investing community. But we thought it was appropriate to further enhance the attractiveness of the bond, because we are seeking to raise $4 billion through tax benefits. And one of the tax benefits would be the conferring of tax exemptions on the profits of the company, as well as interest paid to the bondholders. Now, the dividend income received by the National Investment Fund Holding Company from Trinidad and Tobago resident companies is already exempt from corporation tax pursuant to the Section 6.1A of the Corporation Tax. However, the dividend income received by the National Investment Holding Fund Company will be subject to the Green Fund levy and also just one second. No, just the Green Fund levy. It may also be subject to the business levy, but I am not certain about that. It is anticipated also that the National Investment Fund Company may make investments which would generate interest income. Because remember, they're getting surplus cash. So you have $8 billion in assets generating $400 million a year in income. And you're investing in a sinking fund. But what kind of yield are you going to get on that sinking fund? So we have to look down the road. And the National Investment Fund Company, in the same way that the Heritage Fund uses an investment management firm and invests in equities and assets and generates considerable returns. We have to look down the road because that may be an option in the future. So if the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited makes investments with the approval of the government, such investments may generate income. Such income would be subject to corporation tax at the rate of 30%. Accordingly, in order to enhance the return of equity for the benefit of the government and the bondholders, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is proposed that the Corporation Tax Act be amended to exempt from tax the profits of the National Investment Fund Holding Company. In respect of the bonds themselves, interest on the bonds is already tax exempt with respect to individual investors pursuant to the provisions of Section 81P of the Income Tax Act. However, interest income paid to corporate investors would ordinarily be subject to corporation tax at the rate of either 30% or 35%, as is the case of commercial banks and companies in the petrochemical sector. Accordingly, in order to make the bond offerings more attractive to corporate investors, it is proposed that the Corporation Tax Act be amended to exempt from tax the interest payable on bonds issued by the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. This would have the effect of exempting from tax interest paid to Trinidad and Tobago resident companies as well as non-resident companies carrying on business in Trinidad and Tobago. As I indicated, the bill is an extremely short bill. If we go to second page, we are amending Section 6.1 of the Corporation Tax Act by simply making some typographical changes. In paragraph ZA of 6.1, we're deleting the word "and." In paragraph ZB, by deleting the full stop, introducing a semicolon, and by inserting after paragraph ZB the following paragraphs. ZC, the profits of the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited, and ZD, interest payable on bonds issued by the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. If one goes to section 6, you will see it's a list. And it's a series of entities and individuals that are exempt from tax. So it's simply adding to this list. And essentially, the important elements of this bill are the insertion of ZC after paragraph ZB in section 6.1 to allow the profits of the National Investment Fund Holding Company to be exempt from tax, and another paragraph ZD to allow the interest payable on bonds issued by the National Investment Fund Holding Company to be exempt from tax. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you would have heard this government talking about the National Investment Fund for some time. You would have heard our proposals in the 2018 budget and further elucidation in the mid-year review. There's been a lot of speculation in the national community as exactly what we're doing and what we are up to. We had two objectives. One is, in order to achieve our budgetary objectives for the fiscal year 2018, 2017-2018, we had to earn a significant sum of capital revenue because the country is still in a position where the revenue from taxation, what I like to refer to as core revenue. So this is revenue from income tax, corporation tax, petroleum profits tax, supplemental petroleum tax, royalty on petroleum, customs duty, value-added tax. These are the main taxes by which this country raises revenue. Let me go through them again. Income tax, corporation tax, petroleum profits tax, supplemental petroleum tax, royalties on oil and gas, value-added tax, customs duties. Those are the main sources of revenue for this country. And that is what I like to refer to as core revenue. And we're still in a situation where core revenue, even though things have improved this year, may still be of the order of $40 billion for fiscal 2018, more or less, whereas our budget is 50. So we're still in a situation where we're short $10 billion. This $4 billion from this National Investment Fund, these bonds, will go a long way to dealing with that $10 billion deficit. We're still expectant that our fiscal deficit will be the order of $4 billion. So we expect to get $4 billion in capital revenue from the National Investment Fund company asset-backed bonds, and another $2 billion from other sources, dividends from state enterprises, and so on. And in that way, we'll achieve our fiscal objectives for the fiscal year 2018. So this is a very important exercise. If this National Investment Fund proposal, or if this project is not successful, we'll be faced with a significant deficit for fiscal 2018. But I'm satisfied. We've been working on this for the last 6 months. We've done a lot of soundings of the market, and it was on that basis we decided to go with asset-backed bonds at very superior interest rates, gilt-edged bonds backed by very valuable and stable securities that I think anybody in Trinidad and Tobago who has capital to invest would be interested in. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be now read a second time. I recognize the member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I take this opportunity to make a contribution on the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill before this Honorable House, which seeks to provide for an exemption of payment of corporation tax, on the one hand, to the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited, and on interest payable on bonds issued by that company, the National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. As the Minister outlined, it is a short bill with two clauses, of which clause 2 is the substantial clause, and which makes provisions for the exemption of taxes both to the company and to purchasers of the bond. But as anyone listening to the Minister would have appreciated, in his giving the context and the evolution to this point where we have come here for the exemption of corporation tax, while the bill itself is a simple bill, the issue that we are dealing with here is by far a very, very complicated one. And I think the Minister of Finance would admit that here we are coming to address the issue of taxes and tax exemption. But essentially, for the first time, we are only hearing verbally, and we have no documentation to that effect of what the National Investment Fund actually is and how it will operate. Now, don't get me wrong, the Minister himself has indicated what will be constituting this investment fund. And he also mentioned here how it will work. But I think anyone listening, any member of this House on either side, and any member listening from the public will understand that this is a rather complicated and detailed document that would be required if we are to understand the full complexities of what the minister is proposing here. So that the issue is not just the issue of amending the Corporation Tax Act, but appreciating what is the significance of what we are doing here and how we are going to do it. So the minister said, for instance, that this is now a registered company. I don't know if you can find the documentation having to do with the registration. We take the minister's word for it, that it is a registered company, and it is now established as a registered company. Do you have directors, Minister, yet?
Yes, I can answer that.
You can answer that, yeah. Yeah.
The current directors of the company are all senior public servants in the Ministry of Finance. It's chaired by the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Vishnu Paul.
Okay, so you've established basically a state enterprise governed or run by public service, the public service. Okay, so I understand now how they are appointed, and that means that they were appointed either by yourself or on your advice by the cabinet. All right? Now, you want to exempt from tax the interest payable on bonds issued by the National Investment Company. Two issues are pertinent here. Who are going to buy these bonds and who are going to get the tax exemptions as a consequence? The minister mentioned that a significant part of the bonds are going to be taken up by corporate entities. So basically, the beneficiaries are going to be corporate entities, and he mentions as well that because of government policy, which is to divest the shares in favor of large numbers of citizens, that citizens are also going to get the exemptions. Now, the elements that constitute this company are quite formidable. You have, for instance, Republic Bank. You have Whitco. You have One Caribbean Media. You have Angostura Holdings. All of these companies are listed on the stock market already. And you have CLICO. You have the CLICO Investment Bank. You have Trinidad Generation Limited, TGU. And some time ago, the minister announced some of these at a meeting, I believe, in Diego Martin, and eventually we got some information here in the Parliament. So you have these companies that are on the stock market and which were, in fact, partially held by CLICO or CL Financial, and basically now we are putting them into a corporate entity which the government is establishing as a state enterprise with a board made up of public servants to which the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the corporate entities of Trinidad and Tobago will have an opportunity to invest. The minister talks about wanting to raise about $4 billion And he says that we have in the package assets of about $8 billion. And on that basis, he feels that it would be reasonable to have the market respond in a positive way to raise this $4 billion. Now, the question is whether there is appetite in the market. The question is whether there is appetite in the market, and it also is a question of whether, in fact, this money can be raised in the manner in which the minister is speaking about here. Because essentially you're going to have $8 or $10 billion worth of assets, according to the minister. And he's now trying to raise $4 billion from this market, and the question that one can reasonably ask is whether the market can bear this. And the reason I am asking this is because you currently have about $2 billion worth of liquidity in the market. And you are really asking for an additional $2 billion basically to be drawn upon from the market. And that in itself presents a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. It is something that we've got to think about. It is something that I think that the minister will have to work through with the elements of the financial sector. And I think that it is easier said than done. And I am not in the least trying to throw any cold water on the proposals of the minister. I think the idea of finally putting the debt
members, one second. Remember, this is the third time an electronic device has gone off in the chamber. Please put your equipment on silent. Thank you. Proceed.
Yes. I think it would be good if we could put this CLICO issue behind us. It has been with us for a long time. I think that it would be important for the assets to be addressed in a way that is beneficial to the citizens. And I think it would be important for the government to create an instrument that has some sustainability in it and some value to the economy in a very constructive way. But as I said, the liquidity is about $2 billion. You're trying to raise $4, possibly $5 billion, I don't know. He said $4. And the question is whether, in fact, this can be done, or how it can be done, or what would it require to be done. I don't know if an institution, for instance, like the Unit Trust would have the appetite for an investment such as this. I don't know, for instance, where an institution such as the NIB will be able to find the resources to make an investment, let's say, of $1 billion in something like this. So what are we talking about? Private corporations and private individuals possibly raising $2.5 to $3 billion or putting up $2.5 to $3 billion to do this. The question also is whether the private sector, the banks themselves, have the appetite for something like this. So that I am raising, first of all, the liquidity situation in relation to the ratio of monies, which is twice the liquidity that they are trying to raise in this particular year. Secondly, I'm raising the issue of the appetite, using the state entities first that are in the financial sector and have the wherewithal, possibly have the wherewithal, and what it would leave for the rest of the market. I'm raising the other question of the private interests, whether they be banks or insurance companies, and their willingness to do this. And then the third entity, the third element would be the citizens themselves and whether or not this would seem as an attractive investment for them. But there are some complications that are emerging on the horizon. The minister is not here now, but I think that at the present time, there are about 9% of Republic Bank in CLICO's hands. In government hands. and there were about 17% left in CLICO. And when you put 9% and 17% together in this National Investment Fund, we are talking about a 26% investment of Republic Bank. Now, as you know, under the financial laws of Trinidad and Tobago, which were amended but which retained some of the critical elements in it, and based on the laws that we had both in 2008 and 2016, there is such a thing called related party transactions. And in becoming involved in a complex, that's why I said it is complicated, it is not as simple as it seems. It seems to me that the government will be a holder of assets in excess of the 10% that is required in the case of related party transactions. And that will raise a serious issue about how it is going to raise some of the money that it is seeking to raise in Trinidad and Tobago. I raise it because it is important to raise it, because we are dealing here with the laws that govern the financial sector, with the laws that govern financial relations, and which the laws that actually govern the financial sector in Trinidad and Tobago. So if you had 26% of the assets of Republic Bank, and you found yourself in a situation where you had to ask Republic Bank or even FCB, which is another company, that
members,
even
please.
FCB, which is another company in which the government has interest and to which the law will also apply, it means to say that we are going to have a problem which the government would have to wrestle with in the context of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have the same problem in FCB as we have in Republic Bank. And these are two major banks, because when you look at Trinidad and Tobago today and you look at what is happening in terms of the foreign-based banks in Trinidad and Tobago, and when you look at the context of the Caribbean, closest to us within recent times, Barbados, and the situation in which they have found themselves, you see that the foreign banks located in these jurisdictions are taking a very different approach to the way they address the question of lending and borrowing and dealing with governments and the whole business of debt. And many, many of those companies really want to shy away from that kind of transaction or from lending heavily to government.
Members, please. Right, there's a continuous chatter coming from on the government side, and I'd like to recognize the member for Caroni Central, please.
Okay. So the minister talked about the, I'll come back to that issue if they want me to come back to it. You know, I'm just trying to put it on the table. But if they want me to come and talk about it, I can spend some few minutes talking about it. So better listen and pay attention and respond rather than murmur and chatter about the matter. Because I'm raising a serious issue about the law of Trinidad and Tobago and about the relationship of the government in this particular situation. I well understand, Mrs. Deputy Speaker, that this matter may not have occurred to them at all. No, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, they were focusing. No, I think you were focusing on solving the problem, which is really what you had to do. And in doing it, some of these complexities did not arise for consideration. That is all. But the point is that they are a reality, and you have to deal with them. So the other thing that I want to say is that the minister mentioned options that led to his getting to this point of the National Investment Fund. But I want to say, when you look at what is being done here, this is essentially a mutual fund, you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is essentially a mutual fund. And the question that arises is that why didn't they just go with a mutual fund? The minister answered that by suggesting, I paid close attention to you, no, Honorable Minister. I was listening all the time. And he said that the reason they didn't go with the mutual fund is that they felt perhaps that that model, that approach might not have been successful. And I thought in saying that, he was honest. And basically, he was saying that the mutual fund was unlikely to get the investment from the private sector and the local community that they would have expected, which is $4 billion on the basis of his articulation of the solution. The second thing is that he said that they could have formed a company. And yes, that's right. A company could have been formed and the company put on the stock market. And then people could have bought shares in that particular company. Now, the value of doing something like that is that you would add something to the stock market. Now, I know he said that at some point, the bond is going to be put on the stock market. But the value of creating a company and putting it on the stock market and let people have shares in it is that basically you would have brought some activity, some action to the stock market, which we sorely need. I mean, you've had nothing on the stock market for a long time except the FCB thing and the Phoenix Park. The FCB shares, the Phoenix Park shares, and basically it could have done with a boost. And part of the configuration here, too, is for a sinking fund of some kind. I think he referred to it. Would you remind me, Minister? You said you didn't call it a sinking fund. But part of the arrangement was for a sinking fund of some time. And the question is, where is that sinking fund money going to come from, and how is it going to be repaid? The ministers made clear suggestions for how it would be paid from the excess of earnings after the payment of interest to the participants in the bond. But that is why I said it is a simple bill but a very complicated matter. And we have to, in making all of this possible for the minister, we have to take all his assumptions about everything that he has put on the table here as a fact that will occur. That is basically what the minister has asked us or is asking us to do today. And when I said that we don't have any documentation of what the minister has said today, it is not that I mean that he has not given little parts of it on the political platform or a little bit of it in the mid-year review or in statements that he has made from time to time indicating how they were going to proceed. But when you take what he is saying now, which is that you're going to put some shares now, not all of them from CLICO or CL Financial, that's to say held by CLICO or CL Financial, many of them on the stock market. You are going to take one entity that is not on the stock market and which had been put into receivership some time ago. You're going to put TGU. You're going to put possibly at some point in time some aspect or some quantity of the methanol, the International Methanol Company, and so on. You have all of these things, possibly other shares that you might want to exchange. He talked about the possibility of swaps. You're talking about, first of all, getting the $4 billion, having this sinking fund, creating the conditions to repay the money, creating the conditions for tax exemption for all of these entities in order to sweeten the arrangement so that they would be willing to invest, we are dealing with a very, very complicated transaction here. And I wish the minister luck with it, but I want to alert him to the fact that although we understand what he's trying to do, even though we are hearing all of the elements for the first time, I think that this is something that requires a kind of careful and meticulous, not just study, but management. I imagine they have done a lot of the studies before. And perhaps they've done a lot of the thinking before. I don't know. Perhaps all their assumptions are correct. I do not know. But I am saying in this very, very volatile, difficult, unpredictable environment that we know, in which confidence in the local economy is quite low, I don't know that this one element of intervention in the economy is going to catapult us to the level that is required to have a $4 billion investment put in and the capacity to meet the obligations for another $4 billion worth of sinking fund money. All of this put together within a short period of time of 1 year or 2 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that is what I'm raising here for this particular issue before us today. Because this is a transaction that has, I suppose, taxed a lot of people over a long period of time. And we find that the solution of an investment bond, I am not sure if it's the right thing to do, if it's the best thing to do, but it is a proposed solution. And I think that there are lots of problems with the details having to do with the resolution of all of these things. In other words, it is a situation in which X has to work with Y working as well, and Z or Z working, and W working, and so on. And when all of these things work together, we are going to have a situation that results in a solution for a problem that we've had for many years. I hope that the minister's assumptions are correct. I hope the minister's assumptions are true. I hope the minister got good advice in putting all of these assumptions together. But the one thing I know for a fact is that this issue of the related party transaction is not going to go away unless it is resolved in some way. And that raises other issues that I want to raise, of which that is one. When you see the tax exemptions here, the minister said that this bond, basically this bond offering, once the investment company is established, can stand on its own and basically will be able to win investment on its own. And let us take for a moment that that might be true. And the question would be asked, well, why are you throwing in the tax exemptions? Why is it necessary to throw in the tax exemptions? Now, don't get me wrong, I am not against the tax exemptions. It makes it a very attractive investment to any individual who might take it. It makes it an attractive investment for any corporation that might do it, that is willing to put their money in that way for a longer period. But if the value is significant in its own right, why are you going to offer the tax incentives? And the only reason I'm asking that is because this entire government policy from the beginning, 2015, the first budget, 2016, 2017, has been one of raising revenue by the means of taxes. And yet, at the same time here, you're coming to give tax exemptions for investment in this particular area. Just as I argued during the budget and the budget review, the mid-year review, that you are taxing corporations, including small businesses, etc., on the one hand, and yet you are giving incentives for housing, for agriculture, etc. It's almost like you are not sure what is the role of taxation in the policy. You are not sure what the policy is. You are not sure why you are doing this. And what I find very prevalent in the government is that they come with one thing at a time as if it were perceived as a holistic solution. And when you put the sets of things that they have done over close to 3 years now together, you find a number of contradictions, a number of clashes, a number of things that do not seem to cohere in terms of policy, which is why you get the feeling that the population has that, one, nothing is happening, and secondly, that confidence is not there for anything to happen from the rest of the population. So, in my mind, the approach to taxation as policy from this government and what taxes are for and how they should work and how they should contextualize in terms of getting an economy to move, that to me is all contradictory because it's done in sections, it's done in little pockets, and when you put the whole together, it does not cohere. And I am not sure that it will make the difference here. The second thing is that the reason I am questioning the National Investment Fund is not because it may not be a good idea or it may not work. I hope it works, and I hope it is a good idea, and I hope all the elements come together. I don't know what the Honorable Prime Minister is braying about, Mr. But the other issue I want to raise is you know what they want is no criticism from the opposition. We must come here and say everything that you are doing is very good and the country is doing honky-dory and everybody is happy. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is, while I understand what they are doing, I don't see how taking elements that are active in the stock market.
Honourable Member, your initial 30 minutes have expired. You have an additional 15. You care to avail yourself?
Thank you very much.
Proceed.
The other element that I don't understand is that if you have stocks that are on the stock market, and you have a pretty damp economy and a pretty damp stock market, why couldn't we just have configured a solution that stimulated activity in the stock market? And the issue may well have to do with what the Minister of Finance says. He says, you know, this National Investment Fund will never go away. It will remain a state enterprise. Did I hear you right, Honorable Minister? He said it's going to become a state enterprise. It's going, the entire entity is going to be owned by the state for all time. And the bonds, of course, are going to be available to the citizen, both corporate and local. And this may well have to do, again, with philosophy. You know, from a philosophical point of view, we on this side, for instance, feel that, you know, home ownership and the spread of home ownership is a very important thing for the country because it anchors citizenship in property ownership. and it gives people the opportunity to enter the financial market in a constructive way with an asset, an equity. We believe, for instance, that land ownership plays the same role and that it plays an important role. And we believe that share ownership, whether it is shares in the public sector or shares in the private sector, is of great significance because what it can do is contribute to productivity. It can contribute to ownership beyond the wages that a person gets for the companies that they work to, whether state or local. And more than that, it can stimulate the stock market in a way that really makes that part of the economy vibrant. But this doesn't do this kind of thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It simply pulls the assets out in order to find a solution, and I know that the solution has to be found. And it takes these essentially private sector assets, puts them in a state enterprise. It establishes a board made of public servants appointed essentially by the Minister of Finance and endorsed by Cabinet, because it would be on his recommendation. And ultimately, that state enterprise remains in ownership of these assets for as long as it desires to, so that at the end of the day, while the individuals in the company, while the individuals who are investing or the corporations that are investing do get an investment return on their investment, the entity remains a state corporation, it seems to me, for all time or until they wish to really divest. And I think that this is a very, very different kind of philosophy, and I think, again, I think it's contradictory to what we need in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that we should take a lot of the state enterprises that we are able to and put them in the hands of ordinary citizens, whether they are workers, whether they are people who want to invest, etc. And by that, I do not mean privatization or selling off to friends or family. I mean selling to citizens by creating the conditions to do that. I also believe, well, the sting in the tail in here is the ownership of the state enterprise in perpetuity. The sting in the tail here is the ownership by state enterprise. And you see, these things have implications too for other things, and they will come down the road. It may well have implications for the seats on the board of OCM, for instance, which has implications for, it may well have implications for seats on the board of OCM, which has implications for ownership and control of the media. It may well have implications for seats on the board of Angostura, which will also have implications for the ownership and for the conduct of business. It may well have implications for seats on the board of Republic Bank, and that has implications for one bank in the financial sector. And therefore, the issues that we are raising here is not simply about making an adjustment to the corporation tax. It's not just to make an adjustment to give people an opportunity to have increased income. It is a very, very complicated issue about how we are approaching the management of the economy, the solution we are providing for this particular problem, and whether in finding a solution, we are creating a bigger problem down the road that might have implications for the economy and the polity of Trinidad and Tobago. The other thing that I don't understand, and I would like the minister to give an explanation of this, is that given what is happening here with the National Investment Fund, what would be the role of CL Financial, for instance, are separate and distinct as an entity. Okay? So I want to ask that question because I truly do not understand, because I don't know what the implication is going to be for that. I saw recently the minister said that there's a chairman for the board of CL Financial. So I will simply ask, how will that operate in the context of the National Investment Bank? Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Finance raised a number of issues here in making his exposition of the background leading up to this particular issue. I have only raised some of the issues that are troubling. The issues that are troubling not just for me or for members of the opposition or for members of parliament or for the citizens, but they are troubling having to do with the way the economy is likely to be managed in the future and the implications of the role of the state in managing some of these entities which have now come under the jurisdiction of the state because of the demise of CL Financial. I understand the need for a solution, and we support any solution that would bring the debt owed by CLICO into the hands of stakeholders of Trinidad and Tobago, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and in this particular, through the particular instance, through the state. But I want to say that the way we manage going forward is going to be is going to help to determine what kind of economy and what kind, perhaps even, of political system we have going forward in Trinidad and Tobago. Because this particular entity, as a fully owned state enterprise, fully controlled in the way that it is, and making the assets available in the way that it has, gives us a way out temporarily. It gives us a way out now. It gives us just an opportunity to solve a problem. I think that the government has come genuinely with a solution to the problem, and we understand and we appreciate that. I am raising the questions for which I would be grateful for answers from the Minister of Finance, including the one I am asking about the related party transactions, but not exclusive to that, having to do with where the shares are going, what are the implications for the stock market, what are the implications for state ownership in the economy, and what are the implications ultimately for taxation policy in Trinidad and Tobago, confidence building in Trinidad and Tobago, and the investment prospects and the possibility of growth for Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for listening.
Recognize member for Diego Martin West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've taken copious notes as I listened to the contribution of my colleague from Karen Central. And if you heard murmurs coming from this side, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, but it was the result of consternation. I have been in the opposition for a number of years, so I know that one has to respond from the opposition benches. But I also worked with a prime minister called Patrick Manning. And he, on occasions like this, when our opponents said things that were wholly confusing and sometimes even outright dishonest, he would say, what do you expect them to say? They have to say something. And today, I am taking that position. The opposition has to say something, but not what my colleague from Parliamentary Central has said. I'm not clear at the end of his speech whether he is saying that he's supporting the National Investment Fund or that he's opposing it. I'm not clear. But I get the impression that he was saying that we are not going down the road that makes the most sense. And he gave all the reasons. And he also is saying that we are passing up an opportunity to make this sea change. And also that we are dealing with the CLICO matter. And let me start right there. He said there's no documentation of what the Minister of Finance has put to us today. And he can't take the Minister of Finance at his word. Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why there's Hansard. Hansard is the authentic documentation, and in this government, this country could take a government minister at his word as records in Hansard. Because if in the future there has to be a change, then we'll change it again. But as of this position, he also made the most astounding statement. He said it's for the first time we are hearing from the government about this National Investment Fund. Mr. Speaker, you are not engaged in the debate today, but I'm sure as a citizen, like most other citizens, long before today, at the initiation of this concept, the government has been out front saying how we intend to treat with the CLICO portfolio, which has now come to the government control. And that brings me to the point. In talking about not being able to trust a government minister when he or she speaks, Mr. Speaker, how many times did this population hear from the last government that we, the government, we, the people, have settled the CLICO matter? You would have heard that from Winston Dukaran. You would have heard it from Larry Hawaii. And if people had taken that as it was said to them, we shouldn't have been here today at all talking about any CLICO and any CLF. But what was happening then, Mr. Speaker, you could not take the word of the members of that cabinet, and I understand now why my colleague from Parliamentary Central think that we are all the same, so you can't take the word of the Minister of Finance of today. Mr. Speaker, the reason why we are here today, after we have been told that we have settled the CLICO matter, is that this government has been confronted the issue, and we are confronting the issue of getting back from the CLICO situation $15 billion of taxpayers' money that was left unattended for the last 7 years.
Unsecured.
Mr. Speaker, when that investment was, not an investment, when that bailout took place, there was no, it was an overnight problem that was dealt with the next morning and so on. And if I had the time today, I'll go into the details of that. But the bottom line is on the day in early January 2009, when we woke up and heard that CLICO was collapsing and the government had to intervene, I happened to have been on the backbench at that time of a government of the day. And the one question I asked my colleagues in the government then is, how much will it cost? How much would it cost? Because there's an emergency debate in here, and being on the backbench, they wanted my support. And I said, how much would it cost the taxpayer? And they were going to a vote, literally in panic. The country was in panic. Systemic collapse was facing us. We have to vote today to save CLICO. I said, I am not. I'm not voting today unless you could tell me what sums of money is involved. They eventually said it's about $5 billion. Mr. Speaker, that ended up at $23 billion. That was 2009. By 2010, Mr. Speaker, these tens of billions had become the reality, and you had ministers telling the country that they could settle the matter. The reason why we are here today, Mr. Speaker, is because about a few months ago, this situation that was confronting this government was that these private sector owners of the CLICO assets, which had been bailed out by the taxpayer, with taxpayers' cash, were taking the position that they would not extend the agreement which gave the government the understanding that it would have given them taxpayers' money backed by their private assets, and of course, the taxpayer would be repaid in the future. It was extended 16 times, Mr. Speaker. And recently, those individuals who own those assets told the government they would not be extending the letter of agreement. And these are monies, these are billions of dollars lent to private people on which no interest was being charged. But that meant nothing to them. When the Barack Obama government bailed out the American companies, they had to pay interest at market rates with taxpayers' money. And when the companies recovered, the government got back the capital and they got back substantial interest. But in Trinidad and Tobago, private sector was bailed out to the tune of $23 billion interest-free. And then you had a government telling the country the matter has been settled and that's the end of it. Another government comes into office and discovers that there's $15 billion outstanding, no interest being charged, and the people who were bailed out were taking the position that the government must get off the board, and they are also not signing the agreement. Well, let me tell you why we are here today. Because as this government elected by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, whose money was in that situation, and as Prime Minister leading that government, I told such persons that the government of Trinidad and Tobago will do everything possible to get back taxpayers' money from private sector situations. Whatever advice they were getting, Mr. Speaker, the advice was that the government wouldn't and couldn't protect taxpayers' interests. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, we had to go to court because they had called an AGM to populate the board with people amenable to them, adverse to the government. And in that case, the government would have been bumped off the chairmanship of the company and the $15 billion, which I understand wasn't being carried on their books. When we eventually saw the details, $15 billion in taxpayers' money that they owe wasn't being carried as accounts payable. That should tell you the intention. But, Mr. Speaker, we went to court and got a liquidator to liquidate the company because the company was insolvent. When we took that initiative, Mr. Speaker, many of our colleagues on the other side and other pontificators in this country excoriated the government. All kinds of things was going to happen in this country. Some of them even accused us of being irresponsible for trying to recover $15 billion of taxpayers' cash that was lent as a temporary solution to a private sector problem. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that the court in Trinidad and Tobago is independent of influences of that nature, and the court ruled in favor of the government's request and gave a liquidator. And the question that my colleague from Caroni Central, I'm surprised that you could ask a question like that, because he was a member of the CLICO empire. He was head of the audit committee. But today, that passed through the inquiry already. I'm not wasting time on that. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, he came here today to ask, very concerned and very hot and bothered. He wants to know what's happening with CLICO. He must have heard that CLF was put into liquidation.
Well, the whole government, last government would have known that.
Liquidation. Because there was a liquidator put in, there is no status or rank for CLF. Yes. But he's coming to the parliament to pretend that there's an issue that he's concerned about, and he gets emotional about the future of the country and the future of the economy and the future of the politics will be at risk. What the government is doing. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be disturbed by anybody, please.
Members,
I start quietly when
between the Minister of Finance and the member for Caroni Central, please, I would like to hear the discourse of the member for Diego Martin West. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For him to come here today and pretend that there's this issue that should concern taxpayers about the government's behavior, the government's policy, or the government's actions, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to describe it with an adjective. But I simply say I'm surprised that he could do that. Because when he was in the government and others in the opposition in the government, they would have seen the insolvency.
Of course.
Because they were in charge. They did nothing about it.
They had directors on the board.
And if one is unkind, one could say apparently they expected them to walk away with taxpayers $15 billion. How come you could have done nothing about that? Mr. Speaker, he goes on to say that this is about an issue which is very, very complicated. Well, the reason why this very, very complicated issue is being handled so simply today is because this government, this country, elected a competent government. So this very, very complicated issue, it might be fun and games to you, but $15 billion is no laughing matter to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
No interest.
I didn't say it, Mr. Speaker. We brought a simple issue here. It was my colleague from County Central that got up and told the population, this thing that the government is handling here, this porcupine, is a very, very, very complicated matter. The Minister of Finance outlined in simple, straight language how the government has acted and is solving the problem, and we have a solution going forward. They may or may not support it, but the bottom line is they think it is very, very, very complicated. What we did, Mr. Speaker, and he asked the question, and I can answer you now. Over the last few months or thereabouts, we took very good, high-quality expert advice. Not the uninformed pontificators. We took expert advice as to how to proceed, Mr. Speaker. And this government is well informed and confident that this approach is the best approach for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we move from a situation where $15 billion wasn't even on the accounts payable to a situation where today, while all the assets are not yet under government control, we have already, Mr. Speaker, have received billions of dollars worth of assets from this pool of money which we lent in 2009 and the years soon after that. So, Mr. Speaker, we are already ahead of the game. My colleague spoke about the other thing that really gets his goat is who are the directors? Who will be the directors? And of course, the directors are public officials from the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, who are the directors of the country's largest pool of money? The central bank. And who appoints central bank directors? The government. The answer to both questions is the government. The government appoints directors, and those directors are persons of competence from one kind or another who run the central bank. So our billions of dollars managed by a pool of people who are appointed in a responsible way, and they fall to be appointed by any government of the day. So what is the problem? What is the problem? Mr. Speaker, checks and balance? You shouldn't have said that. Mr. Speaker, the only government that abused the central bank appointment of directors was those people on the other side. When they came into office, Mr. Speaker, they met a central bank board in place, and central bank directors are rotated, not all together, sometimes, and so you always have experience on the bank. They came in and they tried to change the central bank. They tried to get the president to fire the central bank board. The president did not comply with that request. You know what they did, Mr. Speaker? They then looked at a loophole in the law. The law said how many directors are minimum. It didn't say how many were maximum. They went and they found persons who they believe were their friends or their associates, and they appointed a truckload of them on the central bank board. Meaning that they now have majority control on the board and they could do what they want, and you know what went on there. I need not be detained by that. That is the only government that ever did that. Interfere with the central bank board and coming into office, and now What they're doing now is using their own understanding of governance to judge us on this side. But we are the PNM and we don't behave so. So the population could rest comfortably at night, knowing that the PNM government that says it is handling its monies would be handling it responsibly and honestly. Mr. Speaker, he wants to know.
Members, please. The only speaker I've recognized is the member for Diego Martin West. And on both sides, I don't want to hear no one, please. Proceed.
That makes sense, Mr. Speaker. He wants to know who are going to be the beneficiaries of this bond sale that the Minister of Finance mentioned. Now, Mr. Speaker, you can't be fish and fowl. It's either you think people are going to buy it or they're not going to buy it. Who are going to be the beneficiaries? It's an argument that I have heard because I've been around this so long, I've heard it. I heard this same kind of feigned concern and incipient objection to the unit trust, you know, Mr. Speaker. When the PNM government was going to create a unit trust in Trinidad and Tobago, there was objection to it in some quarters. Some because they were not confident the country could handle it. The others because they must object. And some had an agenda of one kind that a unit trust didn't fit in with. But you have to understand, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, you can't please everybody with anything at all you do. Otherwise, we'd have had one religion. But I always know that if you come here, Mr. Speaker, and you open the treasury one Saturday morning and say, go down and take as much money as you want, some people would say, you can't do that, it's irresponsible. And if Angel Gabriel come down here on a Saturday morning, they will say, I don't like the color of the wing. You can't please everybody. So when you hear the criticisms, it is not that we are saying you shouldn't criticize us, but the criticism must make sense. Who are the beneficiaries? We, as a matter of fact, the reason why the Minister of Finance spoke earlier than coming to the Parliament about this National Investment Fund is because persons who were either uninformed or not wanting to hear at all had started to say and started to accuse the government of taking steps to hand these assets that we have come into control of to the hands of a minority, a few, the well-heeled few, and party financiers. That was going on in this country. And the Minister of Finance had to respond and say that no, we'll be creating a national investment fund that will give the opportunity for the widest possible participation. Today we are being told by my colleague from Caroli Central that the option that they would have used, or he, if he had an influence on it, is to put shares on the stock exchange to create stock exchange movement. Mr. Speaker, let me just remind you that the main components in this National Investment Fund are entities that are already on the stock exchange. So those who are looking for shares as a place to put their assets, their money, they could buy shares in Republic Bank, they could buy shares in Ocean, One Caribbean, they could buy shares in Angostura. That is already available. And if they additionally want shares in a fund, a bond, if they want to buy a bond with a guaranteed yield, that is quite different. That's a quite different investment to an investment in shares. Because if you invest in shares, it depends on how well the company performs that your dividends are determined. That's one kind of income you will get. But the bonds, on the other hand, you buy bonds, and the bonds guarantee you an earning. It doesn't matter how the company does. The person who issued the bond is contracted to pay you a percentage on your earnings. So you could cover your bases on both sides. So what is he talking about?
Nothing. No sense.
What's he talking about? And as I said, Mr. Speaker, we didn't do this willy-nilly, capriciously. We took and digested the best advice and came to a conclusion that is best for all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we're done. And then, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the appetite. Because already, the minute we mentioned the National Investment Fund, there were those who jumped out in front and we're saying, oh, it will fail because we don't have people who, the bonds will not be taken up. Because there are some people in this country, Mr. Speaker, President Trump is not excluded, who every single thing you raise in this country, they have a negative outlook to it, and some of them actively want it to fail. Because they believe that in that failure, they will have success. There is a lot of that going on in this country, Mr. Speaker. They want it to fail because they believe in failure, there will then be an improved offerings. But let me say something, Mr. Speaker. This and similar initiatives of this government are not initiatives of us, the ministers, or of the PNM, but they are initiatives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And all those who are harboring as a failure, all those who are harboring as a failure, what in fact you are harboring as a failure of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But we on this side, we have every confidence that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can succeed and will succeed. We have confidence that if we do what has to be done, we will be visited by prosperity. And this is one of those actions. And to come here today and hear our colleagues on the other side, who told us they had fixed the issue.
Several times.
They had fixed the issue. And now, when we found out $15 billion was jumping up in steel band to come here and advise us on how to deal with it because we can't deal with a complicated issue, we say thanks, but no thanks. Mr. Speaker, in our central bank in Trinidad and Tobago, there's $103 billion in cash in the central bank. And that's Trinidad and Tobago dollars. In the commercial banks. Owned by the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. $103 billion. Mr. Speaker, a small amount of that is mine. A small amount of that is my own. I have a small account in a bank, very small. But small enough, Mr. Speaker, that I expect to earn something on it. Mr. Speaker, when I get my bank statement and I see that on my substantial amount of money in the bank, I earn $7 in interest. I can't even buy gas to go to collect $7 with that.
You earn more than I get it.
Mr. Speaker, on some accounts, zero they get in. Some people have money in the bank, you get zero interest. And I'm told the way the bank's behaving, after they deduct charges, you have to pay them to hold the money in the bank. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we expect, Mr. Speaker, that persons who are owners of this money will take the opportunity to put it in a situation to earn something on it. Mr. Speaker, in the public sector deposits, in the commercial banks, public sector deposits, $6.9 billion. That is taxpayer money in the public sector. State enterprise sector, $6 billion they have there. The private financial institutions, $10 billion. Businesses, the businesses of this country, private sector business, $25 billion. NGOs and sole traders, $3.8 billion. And citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as individuals have $51 billion in the banks of Trinidad and Tobago. And you want to tell me that we give them this opportunity to invest to the tune of $4 billion and they will turn their backs on it because we've done the wrong thing? Well, Mr. Speaker, we've already told people, even those with small kakada, put some aside and put it in this bond and you get a good return. $18 billion in US dollars in this country. Private hands, commercial banks. And that is largely people who are holding cash, waiting, and waiting. $18 billion in cash in US dollars. And the reason from some of that money is that they want a good return on it. So if that is so, and we are putting less than $1 billion worth of assets on the market, and in this country it will fail, then maybe those who want this country to fail is onto something that we don't know about. Right? Because, Mr. Speaker, the country has what it takes to see opportunity. And the same way the little people in this country and other people in this country saw the unit trust as an opportunity for them to become savers and participators. And today the unit trust is one of the most successful financial institutions in this country. I have every confidence that the bonds that the Minister of Finance will make available in the coming weeks, that the people of this country will not be advised by others, but will be advised by those who wish this country well, and they'll participate in this bond that Trinidad and Tobago will put out there. Mr. Speaker, how could you put out bonds and with a rate of return 4.5% for a 5-year tenor? So if you want to put your money out and expose it for 5 years, you're guaranteed an income of 4.5%. Where are you getting 4.5?
0.5% on a
But I'm saying, where in this country, if you have money, like the monies I just outlined in the various subsectors, where are you getting 4% or 3% or even 2%? You're getting 0.5%.
At best.
And here is an opportunity to earn 4.5% for a 5-year tenor. And my friend is telling me that he doesn't know that there's appetite. Well, we think that there is appetite and people are hungry for this kind of investment in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Speaker, if you are sufficiently in funds that you could invest on the longer term, the 12-year bonds will be guaranteed earnings of 5.7%. Attractive rate of return on any investment. Mr. Speaker, if you are an institution like a trade union or a credit union or unit trust, you could enter into a 20-year investment and you're guaranteed a 6.6% return. Where else can you invest that, Mr. Speaker, and get that kind of return?
A government bond on investment rate.
Backed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. 6.6% on a 20-year tenure. And if along the way you get fed up of the earnings and you're getting too much money, or you have a problem, you want to sell it, you can sell the bonds. And of course, I'm being reminded, Mr. Speaker, that the earnings are without tax. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have difficulty in understanding why my colleagues on the other side would not support this and encourage our nation to become savers. I remember when I just came into public life as a young parliamentarian, the issue then was we need to save more. The country was not saving. We were consuming everything that we had, and our savings were too low. We still are too low in our savings. But this is an opportunity to deal with that kind of thing. Savings, whether it's at the family level, the business level, whatever, it's an opportunity to save and be guaranteed a good return on your income. I am sure there are many people who will be hearing me saying this now who have significant sums in the banks earning next to nothing. And whether you put it in the bond issue here or on the stock exchange or wherever you choose to put it, wherever you feel more comfortable with at the personal level, if you participate, then you'll be contributing to the overall national development. But my friend here coming and saying that there's some sting in the tail. Sting in the tail? Mr. Speaker.
Member for Dago Martin West, your initial 30 minutes have expired. You have an additional 15. Care to avail yourself?
15?
15, only 15.
Whole 15? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, where is my colleague from Caroni Central seeing sting in the tail? Which tail? The tail that he's seeing is that public servants would be running this. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not an operating company selling rum, selling newspapers, running. All they're doing, all this initiative is the assets of those companies. Taxpayers are now the owners of the asset, and the government is issuing bonds against this portfolio of assets. Nobody in the government or in the directorship of the Ministry of Finance, the public servants, they are not going into the companies. The companies are going to be there running as usual, making their profits as usual, paying their taxes as usual, paying their dividends as usual, the same way it was done under the last government. Because when they were in government, you wouldn't think that they had government appointees as directors on those boards. But all of a sudden today, if there are government appointees on those boards, then he is seeing the apocalypse. Oh, you didn't? Apparently you didn't know what you said, right? Mr. Speaker, you heard the concern. You heard the concern and the backup from his colleagues disturbing you about public servants being on the board of the NIF. He went as far as to ask, he wanted to know them by name. My colleague had to get up and tell him who the names are, including the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance and the others. But you see, they want to personalize every single thing. They want to call people name, accuse them of this, accuse only one name they know. What does it matter? It is the office of the Ministry of Finance that will be doing it. It matters not who is in the office, it's the office of the Ministry of Finance, the permanent secretary. Because if tomorrow Vishnu Danpal leaves the Ministry of Finance, he may not be there. It is the person who is there as Minister of Finance. Why are they always trying to create that there's some conspiracy? Mr. Speaker, that attitude comes because they know how they behave when they were in government. And let me just touch on one point here, because this is going to come up. This thing that we may not have noticed. Mr. Speaker, in Tobago we have a saying, that goat that boiling for the water, and he who want it. Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Caroni Central, very deliberately mentioned when he raised this thing about the government's position in this ownership now, and we'll become a party, a related party, and therefore we cannot then be having the freedom to borrow in the financial sector, and so because we are a related party. And he went on deliberately to say, maybe we did not think of that when it is because he knows that that argument is an argument from Republic Bank that has put it to the government, and what they are arguing about now, what they are arguing about is whether, now that the government is in charge of a large block of Republic Bank shares, whether the government will want to put directors on that bank's board. And there's nothing new about that, because your vehicle for that argument came from the outside. And you brought it here as an advance of that argument. And I raised this, Mr. Speaker, I raised this for the public, because it's not new. When CLICO acquired the Republic Bank shares, there was mayhem in this country by the establishment that thought that CLICO should, even though they owned the shares, they shouldn't have directors on the bank. And they made them, and somehow some agreement was made where CLICO will own the shares, but the directors will remain the way it was. If that is what they're asking for now, come out and say so. But don't come here and raise any spurious argument about a related party and maybe we hadn't noticed. We noticed because, you know we noticed? Because they've lobbied the entire cabinet and it's threatening the government with that. But we are saying, we are the government of Trinidad and Tobago and we will not be threatened by anybody. The government under them, who making that issue now, that your government has, you have some 10%, they have some law that if you own more than 10%, you are, Mr. Speaker, when the government owned 100% of FCB, they were the cabinet. And they did all kinds of business with FCB that was never an issue. Because according to them, we must go and sell off 90% of FCB shares now because government owns it. But those who now realize that the government is a major shareholder in Republic Bank and give them an argument to bring to the parliament, they come telling us that the government is not a related party and there's some dangerous thing here and it could damage the economy in the future and the politics in the future. Hogwash! That's what it is.
All of their bonds were signed by the
right?
cabinet and AG.
You know, and that brings me to something else. There's a tendency in this country, Mr. Speaker, that the government must not have any say in running this country. Everything must be run by somebody else. But when the people of this country elect the government, they elect the government to run their affairs, and this government will run their affairs. What's this? point that is developing all over the. You have a government, but the minister mustn't be involved. The AG mustn't be involved. The prime minister mustn't be involved. And it is because of that folly why today we can't appoint a commissioner of police. Hold the prime minister accountable for crime in the country, and the prime minister has absolutely no say as to who is commissioner of police or whether there's a commissioner of police. You're going to appoint something, you don't want the minister involved. That, to me, is hitting at the root of the democracy. Because many of those who want to wield authority in this country, nobody elected them. And they would never put a name on a ballot paper to go anywhere. But the minute you elect a government, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, then who is to do it? The unelected. And when members of parliament subscribe that, you too devalue this office that we hold in this parliament. Mr. Speaker, you know, my colleague from Caroni Central, he's been in the university for a long time, and he gives us the benefit of the esoteric intellectual. So today he gave us a little snippet, and he talks about this whole question of the philosophy of taxation. The Minister of Finance told us that what we are doing, having succeeded in taking steps to recover the $15 billion, as we recover them in assets, we're not selling off the assets, as he is recommending we do on the stock exchange. The government will create this fund. The fund will be an earning vehicle, and we invite the public to buy shares in there with a guaranteed return. Who is the public? Who is the public? Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be disturbed. Could you protect me from that? Move over there, please.
Again, members, silence when other members are speaking. And the only person that I have recognized is Diego Martin West. Proceed.
I thank you. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, who are the beneficiaries and who is likely to buy large chunks of these bonds? The Unit Trust Corporation. Who owns the Unit Trust? Who will benefit from the earnings that the Unit Trust will make when they buy these bonds? The little people of this country. Everybody who is an account holder in the Unit Trust, when the Unit Trust would have bought some of these and benefit from the earnings of these companies, that is what will pay them the dividends from the Unit Trust. So they are a participant and by extension a shareholder. The National Insurance Board would buy a large chunk. When the National Insurance Board earns millions from these interest rates, whether they're generous, in fact, the more generous they are, the better for the little people, because the Unit Trust and the NIB will be the beneficiaries of a large chunk of it. So who are the beneficiaries? And for my colleague to come here today and raise whether there's any appetite for it, in other words, it's going to fail, and then you want to know who will be the beneficiary, these are mischievous questions because I know that he knows better. And then accuse us of not wanting criticism. Our backs are broad and lined with leather, so we know criticism. And this is not criticism that is helping us to advance or to improve it, It's criticism for saying something that doesn't make sense, giving the impression that you are supporting this wonderful national initiative. One, when we had money, we lent it to Clico, private sector people. Unsecured. Unsecured. That is what. Secondly, we are now in a time of great difficulty recovering that money. Not in cash on this occasion, but in assets. We can't put the assets in the budget. We can only put cash. So we found a mechanism to let the assets convert the cash to the budget. And of course, the mechanism we're using is one that gives us long-term benefit and the widest possible ownership. I cannot for the life of me understand how my colleagues on the other side will criticize this and not support it, and at the same time say that they're in support of the little people or the big people or the mid-sized people in Trinidad and Tobago. It's either you are fish or you are fowl. I've never seen a fowl with scales. I've never seen a fish with feather. You have to be on our side, Mr. Speaker. And matters of this nature is very straightforward. If you know of any improvement that can come to it, we are open to any suggestion for improvement. But don't come and tell us that we are threatening the economy of the future. And he goes and says, you know, the whole philosophy of taxation. Mr. Speaker, hear their philosophy on taxation. And this is why we are irritated when they try to give us advice. Here's their philosophy on taxation. They're now carrying on about property tax as though it's leprosy. A tax I've been paying since I was 17 years old, because I always knew you own property. When my grandfather gave me 2.5 acres of land in Tobago, I knew I had to pay tax, $1.44. But I knew I had to pay it, because if I didn't pay it, there are certain consequences. They're making a political mayhem out of that, misleading the people in this country. But at the same time, they're foregoing billions of dollars in property tax. They're borrowing money. They're borrowing money to fund a budget with a deficit. They ran a deficit on every single budget for the 5 years they were in office, borrowing money to service the country. But at the same time, their philosophy on taxation doesn't allow them to collect the property tax, which has been on the law. In 2009, they gave 5 years of waivers, and on the way out of office, they eliminated the waivers, saying that next year, 2010, you will begin to pay that tax. Well, 2015, 10 to 15, they gave a waiver on a law passed in 2009. On the way out of office in 2015, they killed off the waiver. And they knew, and they said to the country, come January 2016, you will be paying that tax. You know they're out there now opposing it and saying that when they come back into office, God forbid, they will abolish the tax.
They do it in 5 years.
No, that is their philosophy on tax. And I end on that note, Mr. Speaker.
You have 2 more minutes.
I'm ending now, to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as Lloyd Best would have said, you see people like that, them is people to watch.
Recognize the member for Caroni East.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing me after the Prime Minister has spoken on this occasion. The last occasion, well, I wasn't recognized, but thank you for recognizing me.
Member, I would like you to retract that statement.
All right, it's retracted. Thank you. Thank you, Madam, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what we just saw from the Honorable Prime Minister is a tirade of pavement talk, talking about hogwash, and not, regrettably so, and not answering any of the concerns raised by our member from Caroni Central. Very valid concerns raised, and the Prime Minister did not see it fit to respond to any of the concerns, but gave us pavement talk and old talk on this afternoon for 45 minutes. Mr. Speaker, it is very astonishing to see a member, the Prime Minister, who was a member of the government then, in 2009, when
silence, please.
When this whole Clico fiasco came to the forefront, I wonder whether the present Prime Minister was not part of a team then of a PNM administration led by Mr. Patrick Manning, whom he referred to when the whole debacle of Clico came to the forefront. And under their watch from 2002 to 2010, this was boiling and fuming, and no participation and no intervention from the PNM government then. And they allowed that Clico fiasco to boil over and hurt the people of this country because of the PNM incompetence at that time which the present Prime Minister now was a member of that government. So how could he come with that audacity and speak about what happened in 2009 when he was part of a government responsible for that, Mr. Speaker? I was in opposition then, 2007, 2010. Many of us were in opposition. And the Honorable Prime Minister was a senior member of that government. So for him now to come and say that he's trying to do something, he has to take an onerous responsibility and a blame for what occurred in 2009. And they put this country into chaos with $23 billion outstanding, and our government in 2010 to 2015 had to come to the forefront and bail out the shareholders and bail out all the policy holders, Mr. Speaker. We had a debt of $23 billion, and the Prime Minister now owes us an apology for what the debt that the country being part of that government. So he has no morality for saying anything at this time, Mr. Speaker. Yes, he has no moral authority for saying anything about this thing. So we paid the $23 billion.
All right, members, Carney East is on the floor, no one else. So silence, proceed.
They had supervisors of insurance, and they dilly-dallied and never took the responsibility to attend to what the supervisor of insurance was telling them. And we had to take the responsibility and pay $23 billion. And today they come and they tell this country that we squandered the money. We didn't do it, what we did. The first thing we had to do is start to see the Prime Minister leaving now, because I'm answering the statements that he made. And that is why last time, I had to sit down. People went overnight at Christmas time with their duster and curls in their hair to take out the money. And one of our present members of the other side didn't have the opportunity. She was prevented from taking out the money by Mr. Manning at that time.
Silence.
So,
silence.
There is no moral authority to come and say that they're trying to do something for this country by recovering $15 billion. Yeah, we paid it out already. And when we in the People's Partnership Government decided that we will work with the shareholders of CLICO and work with the agreements, we had, the Prime Minister spoke about, we had 15 agreements, 20, whatever, 16 times. We had agreements 16 times. The rationale for that was that every 3 months or 4 months, the government of the day could understand what the shareholders want.
Members, please. Member for Port of Spain South and member for Couva South. All right? Again, if you all want to have a chit-chat, you all are free to exit the chamber and proceed. But I'm not tolerating the crosstalk. Carney East.
So the issue at that time was how often should you meet with the shareholders, because you have members on the board. You wanted to keep this exchange of information on a regular basis without people running away and having it every year or every 6 months. So that was the reason why you had to have the agreements over a period of about 16 times during the number of years that we were in government. Mr. Speaker, the issue of the liquidator coming in and this government going to the court to deal with this matter. You know how it arose? Because the Minister of Finance failed to heed to the calls of the shareholders of CLICO. And I would want to have a descriptive adjective for it, but I cannot say it now. Well, he was nonchalant. He was nonchalant. He didn't pay any respect to the shareholders at that time. And when you anger somebody by disrespecting them and not paying attention to their calls and their heeds, they must get fed up. And they got fed up of him. So that's why they said that they're not going to participate in any further agreement. And they wanted to pay the money. They had the money to pay, to settle the outstanding debt. But the Minister of Finance paid no respect and no heed to so he went to court, and told the court all sorts of things. And therefore the court ruled that they must liquidate the assets of this company. But you know, when you liquidate the assets of a company, I was an owner of St. Clair Medical Center in the 1989. And 95, or somewhere around there, they came and liquidated St. Clair Medical Center. What was the value for about 14 million then? It was liquidated to 7 million by their friends in a particular bank, sold out to their friends. So when you liquidate that, so all of us lost our money. I lost 200,000 US in those times. Yeah. I'm a doctor for 44 years, you know. Yeah, 44 years. So, Mr. Speaker, when you liquidate a company with all these assets, they go up in a fire sale. Do you really believe that you'll be getting the value for the assets that we have in these various companies? So you liquidate CIB, you liquidate the other companies, and they will all go up in fire sale. And as I'm speaking about that, I remember HCU was liquidated in 2009. 9 years now, they haven't settled the issues with HCU. And the matter remains outstanding. And CIB now has been liquidated, and you will see how long these matters will take to be sorted out. And the Prime Minister said we could have seen the insolvency because we were in charge and we were dealing with that. 2 ministers of finance had to rack their brains and get expert opinions and go to the population to discuss how we can solve the shareholders' problems, because thousands of people were affected and they were screaming for their money. People were losing their lives because they had no money to look after themselves. They couldn't get the money that they had put into CLICO. And there was a way that we had to find ingenious ways to help these people to get some money over a period of time. And the audacity of this Rowley-led administration to criticize our People's Partnership administration, and because we did a fantastic job on this issue to satisfy the people of Trinidad and Tobago. When the Prime Minister speaks about the member for Caroni Central being on one of the central bank, CLICO board directors, I wonder if he knows my good friend, I'm sorry that I have to bring this up, Attorney General, but the Attorney General was a member of the CLICO Investment Bank at the time. Oh. I asked the question, and I think the Attorney General says that. So, on one hand, you're criticizing the member for Caroni Central being a member of the board of directors of one of the CLICO groups. But right there sitting at his side, a very lovely person, the member for the Attorney General, was a member of CIB. So you can't try to ascribe leaks on one side and right in your own house you're having problems. So I wanted to correct that. And he went into a tirade about the central bank and the central bank governor and whatever. This Rowley-led administration hounded out of office the central bank governor, Joala Rambaran. Opened up some questions to him, and when he answered the questions, they went all around the boat to see how they could impeach him and get him removed. Which boat? All around. to see how they could impeach him. And they persecuted and persecuted and persecuted the central bank governor, and they eventually sent him out as governor of the central bank. That is what this country had been subjected to by this Rowley-led administration. The central bank is an authority on finance that shouldn't be interfered with by any administration. They direct monetary policies. The government's supposed to deal with the fiscal policies and do not interfere with the monetary policies of the central bank. But they went after the head. They went, and the Act protects, the Act 44D protects the central bank from interference by the executive, Mr. Speaker. It protects them. And it was the PNM administration that took the central bank away from the Freedom of Information Act. I wonder how many in this country will remember that. Central bank was under the Freedom of Information. They had to report to the national community. And it was the PNM administration that went on deliberately and removed the central bank from the Freedom of Information Act so they could do their own thing during their time, and nobody could question them. We met a situation where, I mean, we have a high degree of respect for Mr. Kojo, but Mr. Kojo at the time did not fit the criteria to be a director of central bank. And you remember he's a professor of history and so on, and whatever, and literature. And we questioned that. So when the Prime Minister begins to say about equivocating the directors of this National Investment Fund holding company with the central bank directors, it's a far cry. The central bank is autonomous. It has to have its directors properly appointed by virtue of certain things under the Act, and it's not a willy-nilly appointment. This appointment by members of the public service to deal with $8 billion in a national investment fund holding company leaves a lot to be desired. It's a far cry from the objectivity and the transparency and accountability, Mr. Speaker, that is required for this type of investment. And you know, the sad thing at that time, Mr. Speaker, when they removed the governor of the central bank, they did it when the acting president was the person responsible for doing it at the time. And the Prime Minister speaks about good governance. What is good governance for this government at the moment? The people are crying. The people are in tears. The people are fed up. The people are frightened. They are scared. They are hurting. And they are calling for the removal of this government, marching across the country. And they should do the honorable thing and call an election and let us...
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48-1, please.
Let's tie in your point quickly, please.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I've gone beyond that long time. It's good governance. It's good governance when you have broken almost every regulation under the procurement aspect of good governance. Why, after 3 years, since 2010, the People's Partnership Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, in the first 28 days of government, she brought on the procurement, she took the procurement legislation to Parliament. And I was appointed chairman of that committee, and then Dr. Tiwari took over after a year. For 5 years, the PNM equivocated about that. The member for the Gomartin Northeast...
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48-1, please, again. Thank you.
I'm responding to the Prime Minister about good
Again,
governance.
proceed. But tie in your point quickly, Mr.
So after 3 years, the procurement legislation has been passed, and we have nothing to govern in terms of when the procurement legislation will be enacted and come into force. Is this deliberate? Are you evading all the regulations that will come into place under this procurement legislation? And you're leaving it so that at the end of 5 years you would not have done anything about the procurement legislation, and you would have gone on to give.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, standing order 48.1, this is not about procurement legislation.
Overruled. Proceed. Tying your point, member.
I was responding to the Prime Minister speaking about good governance. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the question today, or make the point. Which government appointed the Coleman inquiry into the aspects of the CLICO? We came and met the fiasco, the CLICO fiasco. And we appointed the Coleman inquiry into this CLICO affair. And that went out for months or years to try to get to the bottom of this issue. But this report by the Coleman inquiry where is it? It has been kept secret. Why is it being kept secret, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Is it to protect some of their friends who are involved in all these CLICO companies? And who might that be? We have to ask. Why are they protecting their friends when the Coleman inquiry has pinpointed certain individuals as being guilty? And they said their excuse is that they do not want to compromise the entire situation because it might be sub judice and so on.
How much money we spend?
A pure excuse, a vacuous excuse. And in the 2018 financial budget analysis, we found out that millions and millions of dollars are still being spent to deal with this matter when they say that they are working on to see how they will prosecute X or Y in this CLICO fiasco, based on the Coleman inquiry recommendations. So we ask the question, having spent millions and millions of dollars on this, who are they covering up for? Are they friends? Or are they financiers?
Former party office holders.
Or are they former party office holders? And you know, it's nice to hear the Prime Minister speak about $103 billion in the commercial banks, and X amount in this company, and X amount in this. It is because of the good work of the People's Partnership Government that the economy came to its best. And the economy was never as good as it was between 2010 and 2015. Never in the history of Trinidad and Tobago was Trinidad run with the greatest competence and ability and a wise expenditure of finances. So there were savings. He speaks about confidence. Who has confidence in this government today, Mr. Speaker? You are putting out a $4 billion bond issue. You're acquiring the assets of X and Y and so on. And you're telling us that the small man in the street will be able to invest in $1,000 bonds. Which small man in the street have $1,000 in his pocket or in the bank?
Who lost their job?
Yeah.
35,000.
When 35,000 lose their jobs,
They're going to invest.
you think they have any money to invest? So where are you going with that? They can't buy clothes for themselves. They can't buy school books. They can't buy food. They have no confidence in the economy. You think they're going to invest in this economy? So if the Minister of Finance believes that this $4 billion that he's going to put out in the National Investment Fund holding company, he's fooling himself. And the Prime Minister, they're trying to tout, we're going to do this and we're going to succeed. I want to read this here. Moody's predicts NIF flop. Mr. Speaker, I'm quoting from an article, Guardian, May 25, 2018, where Moody's is predicting that the National Insurance Fund will flop, sees very slow non-energy recovery. And permit me to quote, Moody's Investor Services says while it expects an energy sector-led rebound in growth for Trinidad and Tobago, that's because of us, with the Juniper and all these things that we did. It sees downside risks to the government's revised revenue targets, which it expects to result in a slightly wider fiscal deficit of around 3.5% of GDP for 2018. 3.5% deficit of $150 billion. The GDP is about $150 billion. 3% of that is $4.5 billion. And another half of that, so it's about $5.2 billion deficit. The Minister of Finance saying we come in with a $4 billion deficit. Modi is telling them, you're not going to realize what you're thinking about. In issuer comments published on May 22, 2018, issuer comment, the rating agency identified the downside risks to the government's revised budget as coming particularly from the sale of assets. So he's telling them, even though you're selling your assets, you're not going to be doing anything. Modi said, we expect the government to raise less than the $4 billion it expects from the IPO of shares in the National Investment Fund. Modi is telling them, you know, they don't like Moody's at all. No, they're going to Fitch. They want to get, and they want to get what Fitch is telling them. So they don't like Moody's, they don't like Standard & Poor's because they tell them the truth. So the Minister of Finance must hear this, if he didn't hear it before. Moody's said we expect the government to raise less than $4 billion it expects from the IPO of shares in the National Investment Fund. We also see some downside risks to non-energy related tax revenue and expect only a very gradual recovery in the non-energy sector of the economy. That would lead to lower tax collection from households and from the value added. You didn't stimulate the economy. You have done nothing to stimulate infrastructure development, infrastructure work. Thousands lost their jobs. There is no heating up of the economy. How could you go say that you're going to collect more taxes and more VAT? In the first year when the Minister of Finance, we call him the OJT Minister because he has not shown his mettle and he has not shown his competence. And he's still wavering in the model and in the mud of the Ministry of Finance. So when he says that they're going to raise $12 billion in the 2015-2016 finance year, we told him no. You know what he went on to raise? $5 billion in VAT. Because you have not done anything to the economy. And so this is why people are fed up, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of jobs lost. Modi also said it sees some downside risks to non-energy related tax revenue and expect only a very gradual recovery in the non-energy sector of the economy. As a result, the ratings agency says it expects lower tax collection from households and from the value-added tax. So when the Minister of Finance talks about all these taxes that he's going to get, these supplemental, the petroleum profit tax, the supplemental petroleum tax, royalty, customs duty, VAT, income tax, corporation tax, Minister of Finance, you are going to fail, and you're going to leave Trinidad and Tobago with a wider deficit than you anticipate. Already you have a deficit of $12 billion. You're going to fail on the $4 billion issue of the National Investment Fund holding company, and you expect, you're saying that you're going to end up with a deficit of $4 billion. You're going to end up with a deficit of over $8 billion, and mark my word, at the end of the year, you will see that. Except if you take away all the money that was given to the Infrastructure Development Fund, about $6 or $7 million, you stifle them from doing anything in the economy, and you take that money and you say that you're saving it. This is what you did in the previous year, Mr. Speaker. So when the Prime Minister speaks about confidence in this country, and under his leadership, I think under his own breath he knows he has not been able to bring the confidence in this country, and he has failed this country, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, I think it would be a good time to suspend for tea at this time. We will resume at 5 p.m., where the member will continue his discourse.
Brilliant.